Assalamu alaikum. Welcome back to another episode of Boys in the Cave. My name is Tanzim. I'm joined by my new political correspondent of Boys in the Cave, Mohammed. And alhamdulillah, we're joined by a special guest. To give a quick intro, he's the deputy editor of British Muslim news site 5 Pillars. He's also a blogger for the Huffington Post UK, a freelance contributor for Jazeera English, the Ceasefire Magazine, the Middle East Eye and Foreign Policy Journal. He's also a podcaster as well. So, assalamu alaikum, Dilly Hussain, and welcome back to Boys in the Cave.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. My brothers, how you lot doing?
Yeah, alhamdulillah, doing well. Not too much going on from my end. How about you, Dilly? What's been happening with you? You seem really busy because you're always active and you got your new podcast going and stuff.
Yeah, I was just about to say, I'm really chuffed and honoured now when when senior veteran podcasters call me a podcaster now. I mean, some of the first podcasts I did was with you guys and the Mad Mumluks and others. So now to hear you guys calling me a podcast, I'm really chuffed and honoured. But yeah, it's good, man. I mean, life's busy, work's busy, 5 Pillars is busy. There's always something happening in the Muslim world or something related to Islam and Muslims. So of course, if it's not journalism, then it's activism. It's not activism, it's dawah. If it's not national, it's local. If it's not local, it's international. Stuff's always happening. And I guess we need stuff to be happening to keep us on our toes, to keep us awake and alert, and active in things which are afflicting and affecting the ummah. So yeah, man. I mean, as for the podcast, I don't know, man. I mean, I'm enjoying it, but it's a headache. It's a chore. It's a commitment. Consistency is key. I mean, I'm having a lot of fun. Don't get me wrong. It is lots of fun I'm having. We've had some very great guests. We've got some wicked guests coming up. But it's a big commitment. And so hats off to you guys, man. Honestly, podcasts to carry on doing it week in, week out. I mean, some of you guys issue 2 podcasts in 7 to 10 days. I mean, I'm currently on like a podcast every 7 to 10 days. And yeah, I mean, it's fun, but it's a big commitment and consistency is key. So yeah, make dua for me, brothers.
Always, yeah. Like, because
Inshallah.
I think we've had this conversation before with you privately. You know, we're all working towards for the dawah, and you know, even with podcasting, it's kind of like in the business world, it's really big. Like podcasting in general, especially in the States, worldwide, it's such a big medium now because Gary Vaynerchuk's really big on it. That from podcasts you can make different media snippets and files, content as well from podcasts. So you can from one podcast you can make like 10, 12 materials, right? So as Muslims, we need to be in touch and in tune with different modes and mediums that we can do the dawah through, right? And sure, podcasting is one of them. And it is like, it's because someone hasn't really opened up when it comes to podcasting, an episode where they actually touch on the struggles of podcasting. It is, you know, a really big commitment, and inshallah, you know, may Allah assist us further, right? Because it's what the ummah need. You know, we need, like with your podcast, you know, it's great to see really knowledgeable guests in the community come on and share their insights. And, you know, it's about making it, you know, high quality professional so the ummah can really benefit from it. So I guess we're all on the same journey sort of thing. So that's why it's, you know, I love referring to you as, you know, another fellow podcaster because we need more of it, inshallah, you know.
Thanks, bro. I'm honored, bro.
Alhamdulillah. Like, speaking of, you mentioned like, so something always going on in the ummah. I wanted to, you know, get your thoughts on Kashmir because it's, you know, it's big in the Muslim world at the moment, and it's unfortunate what's going on with the situation. And at the same time, we don't actually know specific, you know, details like day to day, like what's actually happened or the events that are actually happening in Kashmir. We know, we just have a basic idea of what India are doing and they're just going into Kashmir. But because you know, you're the journalist here, could you give some insights into what's actually happening in Kashmir?
I mean, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah. I mean, look, I think when we discuss topics as vast and as big as Kashmir, it's very important, just for your listeners even, to even set out just some very basic history, right? Now, obviously, it will require further research and further reading into it, but it is very important that a tad bit of historical context is always included. Now, obviously, Kashmir is in the Indian subcontinent. It was previously governed by Muslim rulers, and then a Hindu ruler called Hari Singh. And then during the partition of India and Pakistan, Kashmir was the only kind of region which is kind of left to its own devices in the context that there was no clear guidelines as to whether it would be a part of Pakistan or whether it would be a part of India. Now, Kashmir has always been majority Muslim. By majority Muslim, I'm talking 90% plus. Now, what happened was that during the partition period, the Hindu ruler, he struck a deal with the Indians. And what he did was he unarmed the Muslims who had fought for the British Empire at the time, then rendering the Muslims without weapons. So then what happened was that he basically signed a deal with India, and he basically gave a large, significant amount of Kashmir over to India. And there was a bit of North Kashmir, which was then given to China. And then, of course, what we know now as Azad Jammu Kashmir, which means free Kashmir, is basically Pakistan. Now, ever since 47, 48, ever since partition, the Muslims of Kashmir have been subjugated to horrific levels of humanitarian, abuses. But then it's not just the humanitarian abuses. It's also to do with the fact that when it comes to employment, when it comes to education, when it comes to, access to basic necessities and basic, resource to, whether it be work, education, health, whatever it may be, Muslims of Kashmir were always given little to no chances. And whichever rulers that they did have that happened to be Muslim, they were more or less just basically proxy stooges of New Delhi. Now, in 1987, there was a massive resistance that took place. And obviously, prior to that, there were two wars between Pakistan and India in that region. Since 1987, when there was a very coordinated uprising against Indian rule. By the way, it's called Indian administered Kashmir, when in reality it's Indian occupied Kashmir. So since 1987, there was an uprising, and many historians would argue that the modern resistance to Indian occupation began in 1987. Since then, around 100,000 Muslims have been killed. May Allah accept them all as martyrs. Thousands of women have been raped. Thousands of civilians and protesters have been blinded through pellets. Political leaders are, regularly getting arrested or put under house arrest. So it's just been kind of madness since the last 70 years. And I draw comparisons mainly with Israel and the occupation of Palestine, because the tactics used by India in trying to maintain control and order over occupied Kashmir is very similar to Israel and what they're doing in Palestine. Constant checkpoints, curfews, disarming anyone that could potentially, bear arms, quelling peaceful protests, really dehumanizing and proper, demoralizing Muslims there. And also we have to appreciate that Kashmir is the most militarized region in the entire world, right? 700,000 soldiers, Indian soldiers, are currently in Kashmir, and that's not to include the 35,000 that recently got sent there. Now, in terms of the political arrangement with Indian administered, quote unquote, remember when I say administered, I really mean occupied here for the listeners. Indian occupied Kashmir kind of had a deal, a kind of very weak agreement with the Indian state. And that was that, number one, we have the right to self-determination at some point. We make our own laws, and no outsiders can purchase land in Kashmir, right? And the reason why they did that was the kind of very, fragile agreement that was made between the leaders of occupied Kashmir and New Delhi. But India had always seen it as an extension of its state, and it's the only Muslim majority state that currently exists in India. Now, the recent events with the revoking of Article 370 and then Article 35A, what that essentially did was that removed the right of Kashmiris to self-determination. It also basically scrapped the entire agreement, which was part of the Indian constitution, that Indian occupied Kashmir would one day, we don't know when that one day would be because it didn't seem like it was coming up anytime soon, but even on paper, that at some point that Kashmiris can vote one day towards their own political destiny. And Article 35A, that stipulated that no outsiders outside of Kashmir can purchase land. Now, with those two things stripped, it's basically an overt annexation and colonization of Kashmir. And of course, that is what the recent controversy has been around. I've had very little communication, but the bit of communication that I have had with activists and fellow journalists in Srinagar before the internet went down is that there's a very strict curfew. No one is allowed out. A crowd of more than three is not allowed. The few instances where there have been protests, it's been violently quelled. The last number that I know was that 12 people had been made shaheed and 20 others were injured. That was like 5-6 days ago. There's no internet, there's no radio, there's no television, there's no broadcast, there's no mobile network. And obviously India sent 35,000 extra troops, which now kind of brings the total to like 750,000 soldiers in Kashmir, right? So that's kind of a very super recap of what's going on in Kashmir. It's whilst the international community calls it a disputed territory, what it essentially is a colonization and occupation of a land which is predominantly Muslim, and it's being occupied by the Indian army and the Indian government. And that's kind of the story in Balamori.
What would you say then? Like, it's interesting. I actually have a close friend in Sydney that I'm friends with. He's Kashmiri, and I think he left for Kashmir like a few weeks ago. And I messaged him, and he actually hasn't responded back. So people in Kashmir, they can't even fly in and out of Kashmir at all. Like, like everything's locked?
Yeah, I mean, with regards to your friend, I mean, if he's gone to Azad Jammu Kashmir, which is Pakistan, then he should be fine. If he's gone to Indian occupied Kashmir, then just pray for his safety, inshallah. I can't see how he'd be able to communicate because everything's been on lockdown. And as for flights, there's no Kashmir airport, from my understanding. So yeah, I mean, I hope your friend's safe.
So how do you get into Kashmir if you're flying? Do you go through like India and then I don't know? Like how do you go into Kashmir if you're flying to Kashmir?
I mean, after as a journalist, I mean, I think that as foreign correspondents, you'd probably have to arrive in India. Whether it be, I'm not even sure if they have an airport in Punjab, because Punjab is the closest region to Kashmir. So you'd have to obviously arrive in India and then drive to Kashmir. There's no way you're gonna arrive in Islamabad, drive to Azad Jammu Kashmir, and then cross the borders. Unless you want to get killed, then yeah, I mean that you can take that journey. But if journalists were to travel to occupied Kashmir, it'd have to be through India.
So in lands that are not occupied by Indians in Kashmir, internet's still cut there, right?
Yeah, from my understanding, I mean, there's friends that I spoke to on Monday, and I've still not heard from them. There's friends that I know that are in India who are of Kashmiri origin, and their parents are still in occupied Kashmir, or they're in Jammu. Jammu is also a big city and district in Kashmir. That's what's called Jammu and Kashmir, and they've not heard from their parents and their siblings. So it's literally lockdown, brothers. I mean, there's no information coming out. All we do know is that the residents there, and we've posted videos on 5 Pillars, so your listeners, if they want to know, kind of get a feel of what's going on, they can look at some of the very early footages from early in the week, which managed to get out before there's a complete lockdown on the internet. From what I'm hearing, the local residents are fearing an imminent genocide, as well as the army coming in and basically, clearing out towns and villages. And the reason why they're probably going to want to do this is because they now plan on shifting millions of Hindus from around India and shifting them into Kashmir, and ultimately changing the demographics of the region of Kashmir. And that was one of the key things about scrapping Article 35A and allowing Hindus to basically now buy land. And what I fear, and what many fear, is that what's going to now take place is that people are going to get run out of their homes. People are going to have a massive refugee crisis. And we may even have a case of genocide where towns and villages are going to be cleared out and prepared and ready for new Hindu settlers from around India.
SubhanAllah, it's actually very scary to think about, because it's not, obviously the situation now in Kashmir, it's really bad, but even around the world we start seeing, right-wing nationalists get into power, positions of power, and able to influence these sort of decision and policy making across the states. So for the Muslim world in particular, it's pretty crazy how things are.
Make no mistake, brothers. The situation in Kashmir has been bad for many years. It's been bad for decades. It's just that the emboldened Narendra Modi and his Hindutva right-wing supremacist ideology has now they've kind of basically done what the Congress Party would have done in a far more sophisticated way. And in the same way that Donald Trump essentially exposed and proved to the world the underbelly of American society. I mean, you can't turn around and say that America doesn't have a rabid, racist and fascist and Islamophobic tendency. You simply can't say it. There's a massive constituency of people that voted for Donald Trump and his rhetoric and his politics, in the same way that you cannot turn around and say, oh, it's just a minority of Hindus who support Narendra Modi. The guy won a landslide. He won 2 landslide elections, right? So, in the same way that we wouldn't say to those who turned up in the Nuremberg trials and those who took part in the Nazi oppression, yeah, we won't turn around and say, oh, we were just following our leaders, right? Of course, there's a whole sophisticated process of propaganda, of otherizing and dehumanizing people to then push racist and fascist and kind of genocidal policies. That's granted. But the point I'm trying to make here is that people are not free. If I meet a Hindu, and I have Hindu friends, if I meet Hindus and I know that they support Narendra Modi, they are partly responsible for what's happening in Kashmir. If I have any Jewish colleagues or peers and I know that they support Israel unequivocally, then they are also responsible, right, for what's happening to the Muslims of Palestine. So the situation in Kashmir has been bad. It's known as the Palestine of Asia, right? And it's because the situation there is so dire. Now with Palestine, there's a lot of PR and a lot of awareness about it, because Masjid al-Aqsa, Jerusalem, and Sham are close to our hearts, because there's textual inferences quite overtly to behind why that region is so close to the hearts of Islam and Muslims. And with Kashmir, the reason why we hear about it a lot in the UK anyway, because the largest Kashmiri diaspora community outside of the region is in the UK. But the situation, I don't want listeners to think, oh, something's just happened now. Yes, the 2 articles have just been scrapped and more soldiers have been sent there, but it's been a militarized and occupied region for the best part of 70 years, and Muslims are being oppressed there on a horrific level. And it's sad, Tanzim, you're absolutely right, bro. I was thinking about it the other day, and sometimes, wallahi, brothers, it's hard to sometimes to find solace and just think to yourself, you know what, if it's not Kashmir, it's Palestine. If it's not Palestine, it's Syria. If it's not Syria, it's Iraq. If it's not Iraq, it's Afghanistan. If it's not Afghanistan, it's Myanmar. If it's not Myanmar, it's Somalia. If it's not Somalia, it's Central. Literally, it's just constant, brothers. Wallahi, it's constant. And, I have to remind myself sometimes that, yeah, you might be getting all kind of demoralized and kind of getting disheartened. But at the end of the day, there's actual Muslims there, your brothers, sisters, fathers, sons, daughters, that are giving their life. And their life isn't in vain. They're not losing their life in vain. Inshallah, they'll be all accepted as martyrs. Inshallah. But we'd want to reflect upon ourselves that from the comforts of our lives in the West, what can we actually be doing within our means and abilities? And I just want listeners to, for those of you guys who will be listening and you're hearing all this news, sometimes shaitan will come and he'll do waswas on your ear and he'll say, look, man, what can you actually do? Besides supplicating to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, besides dua, what can you actually do? And then you kind of seclude yourself from the affairs of the ummah. But then we have to remind ourselves of 2 very important hadith. Number 1, we know the very famous one, the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam compared the ummah to a body, and when a part of that body is harmed, the rest of it responds in fever. And the second hadith is the one where Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said that the one who wakes up and does not think about the affairs of the ummah, he is not from us. So we shouldn't get disheartened. we shouldn't seclude ourselves away and hide ourselves away from these issues. We do need to actually find out how we can contribute in raising awareness, holding injustice and oppressors to account, as well as what we can contribute in terms of short-term and long-term solutions.
Okay, Dilly, I have a question. Why do you think India decided to annex Kashmir now? Because like earlier this year, I think India had an election and Modi, like he went around saying all those racist things and he won by a landslide. Like Modi, he does by like habit and stuff, act all racist and stuff before the election because he knows it's going to get him votes and whatever. But like this time, like he decided to annex Kashmir after he won the election. I'm wondering like, what's the logic behind that? Like, I've been thinking that maybe he made some sort of promise that if you annex me, I'll get Kashmir for you guys or something like that. But when I Googled it, I couldn't find any articles about it. And you're a journalist, so I'm guessing you're better informed on this. So like, whoa, what sort of insight do you have?
Well, first and foremost, there's a fantastic piece of analysis which Five Pillars published 2 days ago. It's called The Reconquista, Kashmir colonized under Hindutva supremacist rule, by a brother, a seasoned activist and a fellow Pakistani called Jahangir Mohammed. In that opinion piece, in that piece of analysis, he actually explains why he believes the reasons behind why Modi chose to do what he do right now. So I've read a number of analyses, and they tend to kind of be two or three. So one, oh, sorry, as a dustbin just fell. So there's one piece of analysis is that Modi moved because he noticed that Imran Khan, the Prime Minister of Pakistan, has just got back from the United States. Its economy is in absolute tatters. Imran Khan, let's be honest about it. I mean, I know there's many Imran Khan supporters these days, and he's kind of become like the new Erdogan, which is basically like you cannot say anything against him or else you're some kind of sellout or agent. But let's just speak the truth here, right? Pakistan's economy is in tatters. Imran Khan's literally be going around the world with a begging bowl, right? He's had an IMF bailout. He's had money being given to him by the Saudis, and he's just gone and secured, I believe it was $3 billion or $2 billion in military aid from the US administration. And whilst his visit there, he told Trump that he would like Donald Trump to be a mediator of the Kashmir issue. Now, I think what Modi did here was that he sniffed weakness. I think he sniffed weakness generally from Imran Khan's administration, and he pounced on the opportunity to move to revoke Article 370 and 35A, as opposed to what he promised his constituencies and his voters. Well, it was no secret. The revocation of Article 370 and 35A was no secret. He's been talking about this. Modi has been speaking about this. It was part of his election campaign where he spoke about revoking these two articles and essentially annexing Kashmir officially, as opposed to just occupying it, officially making it in unison with India. And you have to understand the ideology, the Hindutva supremacist ideology believes in a greater Bharat, a greater Hindu Bharat. And the greater Hindu Bharat, brothers and sisters, it actually includes Bangladesh, it includes the entirety of Kashmir, and all the way westwards to the Indus Valley and River. That's what Hindu nationalists and Hindu supremacists, that's what they foresee India to be, right? Well into Pakistan's territory and obviously the entirety of Bangladesh. They see the entirety of those lands as part of the greater Hindu India. And a part of that ideology is also to rid India of Muslims, because they see that India, for the best part of 500 to 600 years, was ruled by Muslims, whether it be the Delhi Sultanate, the Mamluks, and then the Mughals. So going back to why now, number one, Imran Khan and Pakistan generally seem weak, and he smelt weakness. Number two, Modi knew that there wouldn't be a comeback from Pakistan in response to scrapping Article 370, 35A, and he's been proven correct. He's been proven correct because the Pakistani government have now ruled out military action, right? It's sad that the best that they could do is decrease diplomatic relationships and ban Bollywood movies. That's what Pakistan's done, right? So he was right. He knew that he had a feeling that Pakistan would not move. and they didn't move. And thirdly, it's of course, as you rightly mentioned, it was a campaign promise. It was a campaign promise. He's been telling his massive constituency, and we're talking about hundreds of millions of Hindus here, brothers and sisters. Hundreds of. If you look at the population of India, and then you calculate the percentage of vote that Modi and BJP won with, we're talking hundreds of millions of Hindus in India who, whilst I don't want to make a sweeping generalization, they'll fall into different spectrums, but there is a strong sentiment that India needs to now re-emerge and reassert itself as an expansionist regional power, and Muslims are second-class citizens. And it's kind of, and it scares me to say this, it's very similar to what the Serbs did in Bosnia in terms of the historical hatred that they have, because when Milosevic and Ratic and these criminals, the Serbian criminals, when they walked into Srebrenica, what did they say? They say, today the days of the Turks are finished. Today the Bosniak women will give birth to Serbian men. They're referring back to the Ottoman history, and you'll find that even in the many instances in the videos that have been coming out of Muslim lynching in India, you'll find that a lot of the Muslims have been called Mughals whilst being attacked. So it's a plethora of issues, and I don't think there's one particular issue, but most definitely a strong element of it is pleasing the right-wing Hindu nationalist constituency, who are not a minority. I would say I don't even think they're a significant minority. They're a majority. It's no secret now that the entire Bollywood industry, from Amitabh Bachchan to Akshay Kumar to Priyanka Chopra, I mean, you name it, they all have Hindutva RSS support. You know, they're all crazy Modi supporters. So we can't, the thing is, and at the same time, it doesn't make the Congress party angels or saviors either. It's one of those discussions again, like, I'm sure you guys have heard this discussion. Oh, Trump's all bad and the Republicans are all bad, and white supremacy. Well, look, Obama and the Democrats were equally as bad, right? And sometimes, you just find yourself, when you find yourself with a right-wing fascist government in any respective country, which appears to be oppressing Muslims, people of color, and immigrants, that nearly in every case, it means that their liberal opposition isn't that better, right? It's just that they're far more emboldened, and they're just very honest, right? We don't like you. We see you as second-class citizens. We will kill you when given a chance, and we're going to take your lands as well. And that's what you're dealing with here. So I think you're right. There was an element of pleasing his constituency, but it's also to do with the fact that revoking Article 370 and 35A and officially annexing Kashmir as part of the Indian state has always been the long-term wish. Even when the Article 370 and Article 35A were established, it was always the hope of New Delhi that one day we will be able to economically prosper in Kashmir. We'll be able to assimilate the Muslims of that region to want to be part of India. But instead what they've done is they've occupied it. They've sent hundreds and thousands of soldiers there. They've killed over 100,000 there. So it's difficult to get people to want to be a part of India when all you've been doing is oppressing and killing and raping them. But I encourage everyone to read the article on 5 Pillars. It's by Jahangir Mohammed, and it's called Reconquista, Kashmir under Hindutva Supremacist Rule. It's a very important piece of analysis. I would actually go as far as to say it's one of the best pieces of analysis that I've read, and I say that humbly, it being on the website that we host. Because it kind of gives a historical context as well as a socio-political context, and looking at the different reasons behind why Modi moved the way he did. And the weakness of Pakistan definitely is a reason. We can't deny that, To my Pakistani brothers and sisters, who are very proud of their roots and proud of their country, and those who are big Imran Khan supporters, I ask you to just for a moment put the lens of nationalism aside or patriotism aside and just understand that what India was thinking Pakistan would do, they've done it, and that is they've not responded. Now, if someone asks me, well, what the hell did you expect? Did you expect Pakistan to send an army over to Kashmir? Well, no, absolutely not. I mean, we have ideals. We have ideal scenarios. where we would love the Salahuddin Ayyubis of today and the rulers of today and the armies of today to just march into areas where Muslims are being oppressed and occupied and, protect them. As much as we want that, we should make dua for that. The reality is, had Imran Khan or the Pakistani establishment and the military establishment, as soon as they got a whiff, and I also find it very difficult that the revoking of Article 370 and 35A happened without the knowledge of Pakistan. What is the point of having a secret service? What's the point of having spies? What's the point of having being kept on your toes with a neighboring country, which the entire security establishment of your country is there to kind of be aware of? That's India. So knowing that, Pakistan could have easily equally deployed a significant number of soldiers in the borders. That would have basically made India realize that, okay, these guys mean business as well. And it would also allow the funneling of weapons to the Mujahideen and the resistance, the Kashmiri resistance, right? And make no mistake again, that's what they are. They are resistance. They are Mujahideen. They are freedom fighters. And there's always been a long tradition of Pakistan supporting the Kashmiri Mujahideen, but that stopped after Musharraf. So yeah, I mean, as you guys can probably already realize, Kashmir is a complex and an in-depth region, and it has so much history and so many. Sadly, Kashmir has been used by both Pakistan and India for political mileage for successive governments and parties, as and when it suits them. For Pakistan, whichever government comes into power, they'll promise great stuff about Kashmir, and they'll promise stuff about saving their brothers, and sadly nothing's really happened. Even the kind of the weapons and the money that was given to the Kashmiri Mujahideen and resistance movements, that's not really happening anymore. That's why now there's a strong call for an independent Kashmir as opposed to a Kashmir that would unify with Pakistan. But Modi is an emboldened man, and he's basically done what he's been promising his people, and that is, we will make Kashmir a part of India, and essentially going to basically ethnically cleanse it by changing the demographics of the region, by allowing Hindus to buy land and do land grabbing there, and basically suffocate the Muslims even further, either into death or as refugees.
Okay. So yeah, Kashmir is one of the more recent military conflicts in, like, say, the Muslim world. Like the other one, which is also happening but hasn't gone as much coverage, I think, is the current Idlib invasion in Syria by Bashar al-Assad and his forces against, like, the last non-fully Turkish held opposition stronghold, which is Idlib. What can you tell us about that?
Again, Habibi, I just want to again clarify. I mean, Kashmir has been far more ongoing than Syria. I mean, I will get to the point of Idlib, but it's important for listeners to understand. Just because we're hearing about Kashmir now doesn't mean the situation there was any better. Kashmir has been militarily occupied by the Indian government for 70 years. We're just hearing about it now because of the revocation of those two articles, which has dire implications for the Muslims there. Prior to that, Muslims were already being oppressed. They were already being slaughtered, and women were already being raped, and all kind of madness was all happening there anyway. It's been happening for the best part of 40, 50 years. We're just hearing about it now. Now, moving on to Syria. Wow, I mean, I think that the first podcast I did with Boys in the Cave, we actually spoke about Syria. Syria, my brothers, every time I think of Syria, I just think of how it began, how close the resistance and the rebels were to victory, and the dire situation, again, it finds itself in, where Turkey, Iran, and Russia now seem to be calling the shots. And Turkey has its specific rebel factions, which is essentially an extension of their army, namely the FSA and other elements. And really, the push in Idlib is against those rebel groups which are not loyal to Turkey or are not Turkish proxies. Now, Turkey would argue that they are merely protecting their national borders and their security by making sure that they deal with the Kurdish problem. And I think for the international community, namely the US and Russia and NATO and others, to allow Turkey to do those kind of things, it's to basically remind Turkey that if and when you move to Idlib, and when you decide to move to Idlib, it has to be against the Islamist Salafists. So here we're talking about groups such as Tahrir Hayat al-Sham, formerly known as pardon? Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham. Hayat al-Tahrir al-Sham, formerly known as Jabhat al-Nusra, and those kind of other groups, right? Those are the groups which are allegedly are affiliate to Al-Qaeda or not. I don't know how true those things are. And we know that Jabhat al-Nusra made it very clear that they parted their ways from Al-Qaeda. But it's those elements which all the powers have seemed to united against. And it's those rebel factions which are essentially holding and controlling what's known as the free areas in Syria. And let's be honest about it, Idlib is the only remaining region that remains under rebel control. And sadly, its fall is imminent. I mean, of course, we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that it doesn't fall. We pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that there is an immense and spectacular and miraculous comeback from the rebel groups there. But what it seems like is, again, a repetition of Halab, what happened in 2017. And it's just all dirty politics, hasn't it? Syria has just been a playground for all of the global superpowers and the regional powers and their proxies to basically use as a political football field. The Turks have got their elements, and of course Bashar is moving in with the approval. Make no mistake, with the approval and tacit knowledge of Turkey and other international powers. In terms of what do I think? What can you think about Sham? What can you think? 400,000 dead, more than half the population displaced. The country is in rubble. The war's been going on for 8 years. What can we possibly say? Except that we pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that the situation changes there. I remember in 2011, 12 and 13, when the revolution first started, the hopes were so high. People actually, people genuinely believed that there was going to be an independent Islamic government that would be established in Syria. I recall that many of the rebel factions were so overtly Islamic in their sentiments and in their end objectives of how they foresaw Syria if and when Bashar fell. Now, of course, from the turn of 2014 and with ISIS coming into the scene and Russia entering the scene, things really took a turn for the worst, and now we find ourselves in Idlib, which is barely standing up and is facing again imminent destruction, and it's all happening. It's all happening with the approval and with the discussions and the deals that are being struck between Turkey, Iran, and Russia.
Yeah. So I've been researching Syria for a while, and I'm wondering how say these political conflicts, how they should shape Muslim identity. So for Syria, one thing I've always wondered is how did a mass murdering dictator like Assad, how did he survive when a few years ago it looked like that he was going to lose? And I researched it, and from what I can tell, his biggest backers, which are Russia and Iran, saved him and stuff. Even though say the US and EU sanctioned him, so he couldn't he would have trouble financing his war efforts. Iran sent him billions and billions and billions of dollars to so he'd still be able to continue to do it. So one thing I've always wondered, I've done a lot of research in this, is the Shia community in general, a lot of them are supportive of Iran, but they're generally very ignorant about how Iran has been supporting Assad. And the reason why that bothers me a lot is because Shias in general, they tend to push the Sunni Shia unity narrative a lot more than Sunnis from what I can see. They actually have a certain day. I'm not sure. It's one of the months. They call it Unity Week. I think it's the week of the Prophet's birthday. They call it Unity Week, in which they call the Sunnis and Shias together, and they ask us to come out, break bread spend with them and eat with them and whatever. But like the thing is, like I've been to these events, but like the problem I have with them is that there's no discussion about like big issues and stuff. Like on one hand, the Shias say, oh yes, we want to unite with you, we want to have good relations with you, but when you go there, there's no discussion about like, say, big important events which cause divisions. There's no discussion about Syria or Yemen or Iraq or anything like that. It's just we can all be friends, whatever. It's all these cliches and platitudes. So like I've never really, I've been having trouble buying this Sunni Shia unity narrative. Like to me, it just looks very disingenuous in a way. So I'm wondering, like, what do you think about it? Like, and like from your experience, like, how, like, in your judgment and stuff, how do you think the Shia community has responded to, like, say, Iran's support of Assad and like the general silence from their community and their leaders?
I mean, from my observations, in terms of following prominent Shia scholars, and obviously you have to understand there's different kind of like sects and majlis that different Shias come from. So some of them will be Sistani, some of them will be from Qom, some of them will be from Khomeini, and there's different majlis that they have. But generally speaking, you're absolutely right. I've heard little to nothing from the Shia community in their condemnation about Iran's support of Bashar, or what Hezbollah has been doing in Syria, or what Shia militias have been doing to Sunnis in Iraq. I've heard little to nothing. And again, you're absolutely right. To talk of unity and not speak out against injustice and oppression, it makes you wonder that those who claim to be the lovers and supporters of Imam Hussain, radiyallahu an, the irony and disingenuity of saying that we are the lovers and supporters of Imam Hussain, and then today, vast majority and large numbers of Shias will support Bashar and will support Nasrallah and will support Iran in their heinous crimes. I'm being honest. I've literally not read or seen or heard anything significant, at least from the Shia community in the UK. Nothing, absolutely nothing, right? About Iran's oppressive policies, about Bashar. And you know what? Those Sunni Muslims who happen to speak out against these things, all of a sudden become Wahhabi Takfiri kind of like Western agents. So there's this kind of like axis of I don't know if you guys have heard this term, axis of resistance. Yeah, so this kind of axis of resistance, that Iran, Lebanon, Syria, Russia are like, the biggest anti-imperialists to Zionism and America, and that's all nonsense, absolute nonsense, right? I have some colleagues and some friends who are of this thinking, and I tell them to their face, it's nonsense, right? Is Iran a regional and emerging superpower? Absolutely. Is it a strong state which some Western countries and some Western powers are worried about its development and progress? Absolutely. That said, beyond cursing America and calling it the shaitan of the world, what has Iran actually done? In the way that it has sent so many revolutionary guards to Syria, how many revolutionary guards has it sent to Palestine? How many revolutionary guards has it sent to Gaza? Iran was one of the biggest benefactors. It benefited the most from the US-led invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq. Why? Because while Saddam was a Ba'athist, he was still seen as a Sunni Arab. And the Taliban were obviously Sunnis. So they had hostile Sunni emerging countries to their eastern and western flanks. So when the US coalition came and invaded Iraq and Afghanistan, Iran benefited the most. And any Shias listening to this, right? I really hope you guys can go beyond, right, this kind of unspoken sectarian lens, right? Just because you speak of Sunni Shia unity, right, doesn't mean that your silence can be seen as consent. Your silence can be seen as support. Your silence and lack of urgency to call out what is a blatant case of a genocidal and mental murderer, one of the greatest tyrants of our time, Bashar al-Assad, with one of the most sectarian and oppressive regimes alive, the Iranians, right, who are also killing Ahwazi and Ahwazi Muslims and Kurdish and Arab Sunnis in Iran. What I say to you is that you cannot claim to be the lovers and supporters of Imam Hussein if you are not speaking out against Bashar, if you are not speaking about the cries of Hezbollah, if you are not talking about the dhulm of the Iranian regime. You simply cannot call yourselves the supporters of Imam Hussein. I'm not saying that there aren't Shias out there who have spoken out against Bashar, who have spoken out against Nasrullah and others. What I'm saying is the leadership, the Shia leadership, has generally been very quiet or supportive. And any Sunnis that come out to criticize Bashar and support the rebels, they are labeled as Takfiri, Wahhabi, ISIS supporters. Now that's that. As for the Sunni Shia unity, I'm going to be very clear, and I've made this stance very clear. Sunnis and Shias can never unite. Historically, there's never really been unity. It's just been a case of coexisting, right? Shias have coexisted as minorities in successive Sunni Islamic civilization states and empires, with exception to the Safavid Empire. In some instances in history, there have been Shia states, like the Buyids and the Alabids in Morocco, but the greatest was obviously the Safavid Empire. Yes, there's been instances where Shias have had, or the Fatimids, of course. So the Fatimids, the Buyids, the Alabads in Morocco, and of course the Safavids, and there's others as well. There's been instances in Islamic history where there have been Shia empires and states, but generally speaking, there's only been coexistence or tensions, right? And I don't believe in Sunni Shia unity because I don't think it will ever happen. To think that it will happen is quite absurd. And I'm also interested to know that how anyone perceives its manifestation. How do we perceive Sunni Shia unity? What is it? Is it a case of us holding our hands and, rolling down the hills as brothers? It's nonsense, right? All I can see is coexistence and working together on shared interests. Islamophobia, racism, institutional racism, stuff that we're facing in the UK, stuff pertaining to halal law and circumcision and marital and divorce laws, things which Muslims are facing domestically as minority communities in the West. Yes, there is many things that we can and should work with the Shia community with. At the end of the day, if we can do interfaith with Jews and Christians, right, based on taqwa and bir, then of course we can work with Shias on shared and common interest. Of course we can. But in terms of this, why can't everyone just be friends and be one? No, that's not going to happen. It's true. It's never happened. It's never happened in Islamic history. It has never happened. There's either been war and tension or just coexistence. Shias have lived as minorities and coexisted under successive Sunni Islamic civilization states and empires, with the exception to the times that they have had their own polities and entities, right? And you're absolutely right. Again, this talk of unity, if we want to talk about unity, then there has to be some conditions and parameters, right? Besides the socio-political stuff, which is how can me and you unite when you choose to either remain silent on what's happening in Syria and elsewhere, or you support it? How can there be unity? But then there's all the other issue as well, is that whilst there is I'm not saying all Shias do this, but we know that they exist. And again, I don't buy that it's a fringe minority, right? How can we truly unite? How can we truly unite with people who essentially believe that that Ali radiallahu anh was the rightful leader after the death of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam? Now, whilst that is a political difference, whilst I appreciate that for someone, even a Sunni to come along and say, okay, from my understanding and from my reading of history and from my understanding of evidences and etc., I believe that Ali should have been the first Khalifa, not Abu Bakr. Does that make them a kafir? No, it doesn't. But how can you ever be normal with this guy? How? There'll always be that, at the very least, there'll always be that discomfort that there's some views about the companions, may Allah be pleased with them all, who are so dear to us, right? That a group of people have certain views about them, which will never make a harmonious unity ever possible. Now, I'm not saying there should be sectarian wars and arguments and debates on wars, and we should be oppressing one another. No, that's wrong. What I'm saying is that we need to snap out of this bubble that there's some kind of like Sunni Shia utopia. There's never been Sunni and Shia unity. Never. There's been instances in history where, of course, Shias fought against Crusaders with Sunnis, but there's also been many cases where the Shias conspired with the Crusaders, right? Conspired with the Crusaders, conspired with the colonialists, conspired with European entities against the Ottomans, against the Ayyubid and the Mamluks. There's been many. In fact, there's been more instances, sadly, where certain Shia movements from Islamic history have shown, overt hostility towards Sunni polities and empires and states. But that's not to say, again, I want to reiterate, I am not here, encouraging or advocating to have hostilities with Shias, right? I'll even quote Sheikh Ibn Taymiyyah rahimahullah, who said that the asl position, right, the default position is that if you see a Shia, Ahl al-Qibla, they are Muslim, right? Unless they utter some words, right, or display something which overtly takes them outside the folds of Islam, then that's different. But then that also applies to Sunnis as well. So our default position is that when we see a Shia and they say Salamu Alaikum and we say Wa Alaikum Salam and they believe in Allah, the angels, the prophets, the books, the final day, and all good and bad comes from Allah, of course they are Muslims. But in terms of unity, right, we can unify on certain things, but there can never be an unequivocal unity. It's never going to happen. And this kind of like rosy, like, yeah, let's all be brothers and sisters, Sunnis and Shias. Yeah, fine. But, we need to have our boundaries and our parameters and our red lines. You cannot say to me that you want to be my brother, but then we know that from amongst your ulama and from the books that you revere, that they are cursing our mothers and they are cursing the Khulafa al-Rashideen and they're cursing the Ashara Mubashirin. I'm not going to have, how can I ever unite with you properly, totally, in entire harmony if I know that these things exist? Now, there'll be many Shias out there that will say, no, we don't believe these things, and that's fine. We're cool then. But then at the same time, will you take the time out to condemn Bashar for what he's doing? Will you take the time out to call out the Iranian regime? I mean, if you look at the Sunni population, if you look at the vast majority of the Ummah, right, we're always slating tyrants and dictators. Don't you guys think? We're always slating the Saudi government. We're always slamming, you'll find Muslims, Sunni Muslims generally have no problem with calling out dhulm, whether it be Sunni or Shia. You'll find many, many critics of Erdogan, of the Saudi government, of many governments, from all the way from Indonesia right to Morocco. You won't find Sunni Muslims that are entirely blindly followers of tyranny and oppressors. I'm not saying that they don't exist, they do exist. But what I find from my limited interaction and observation is that you just don't hear it from many Shias. You don't see them calling out Bashar. You don't see them calling out what Hezbollah has done in Syria. You don't hear what Iranians are doing to Sunnis in the eastern provinces in Iran. You don't hear these things. Do you understand? So, yes, we can unite. We can absolutely unite on shared interests, goals, and things which matter to us. But I can't understand how this unity would manifest in reality. I don't understand, because historically it's never taken place. Historically, it's just been coexistence.
Yeah, okay, Dilly. So, I'd like to question you a bit further on, say, Sunnis and Shias uniting on shared interests. I agreed with you, but only to a certain extent. Say, domestic issues and whatever. I think, in sort of say international foreign political issues and stuff, we need to draw a red line. Personally for me, I don't think Sunnis, with Shias in the current state, I don't think Sunnis should see Shias as allies in freeing Palestine, because the thing is that when you consider Israel and Assad, they've pretty much committed the same crimes. Like Israel, Assad has killed thousands of people, he's displaced thousands of people, he's destroyed entire cities, he used used chemical weapons, and he relies on the UN Security Council veto to escape punishment for his crimes. So like, he's almost similar. So like the fact that the fact that the Shias go on and on about like say the Zionist crimes, and the fact that they don't go on about say
the Zionists, the evil Zionists.
Yeah, the Zionist crime. Like, I just find that to be like, a bit inconsistent, because like at the end of the day, we're not condemning Israel because they're Zionists or they're Jewish or because they have white skin or they came from Europe or whatever. We're condemning them for their crimes. Like, that's the main goal. I think Shias sort of lose this when they talk about Zionism. They just say everything to do with Zionism, anything related to it is bad or whatever, but they don't focus on the most important thing, which is the crimes. And like, when you focus on the crimes and you generally accept that, like, the thing that needs to be condemned the most are the crimes, then you're gonna start to notice that, like, Assad has the same crimes. So like, you'll start to see this disconnect with how the Shias are behaving. On one hand, they talk about like how they're against oppressors or whatever, but like almost all of them tend to ignore Assad's crimes. So like, in my personal opinion, Sunnis shouldn't see Shias as allies in like say Palestine. Like, I know a lot of Shias try to do a lot for Palestine. Like they call
it much.
Yeah, the last Friday of Ramadan, they call it Quds Day, and it's all about Palestine, and they have all these protests all over the world, and they have all their different Shia sheikhs to come out and give lectures and stuff. But like but despite all of that, I don't want to work with them. I think this is what I believe with Palestine. I think that for Palestine and like for any cause of social justice, like Sunnis or religious people in general, we should focus more on getting sincere allies rather than just more allies. We need to check, like, when somebody comes up and says, hey, I want to help you in this cause, like first you gotta go is like, all right, why do you want to help me, and are you doing it for the right reasons? Are you sincere? Because like, the thing is, like, if you're not doing it out of sincerity, then like, why should anybody listen to you? Like, suppose a Zionist supporter comes up to you and like say, like, I'm at like, a pro-Palestine rally with like say my Shia friend, and like the Zionist guy just says to me, hey, why are you protesting against the crimes of my country? Like, look at your Shia friend. He never talks about the crimes of Iran, the crimes of Hezbollah, the crimes of Assad, which are very similar to Israel. So like, if you can ignore your friend's crimes, then why can't you just ignore mine? Like, why is your friend special? Why is he getting special treatment? And like, that's a pretty good argument. Like, why do we Sunnis, like, that's what I've noticed in general, Sunnis are more forgiving of Shias than we are of like say Zionists and Israelis and whatever. And I just think like, that's just wrong. We shouldn't be giving anybody special treatment when it comes to like say crimes, especially matters of life and death. We should treat everyone equally and stuff, because like, life and death and like murder and stuff, this is all serious business. We can't afford to go to double standards with it. So like, my personal opinion is we shouldn't like accept Shias as allies with Palestine and stuff. Like, if a Shia ever like sends me an invite, says, hey, we're gonna do like a rally in Quds Day, do you want to come? I'm just going, nah, sorry, I want to help Palestine, but I don't want to do it with you guys. I want sincere allies, people who are consistent in their moral and ethical principles. Like, I just don't accept double standards from anyone.
Yeah,
so yeah, that's my opinion.
Just like during the Christchurch attacks, what happened even here at university, long story short, we have two MSAs on campus. One of them, because it's kind of like a dictatorship. The other one, we couldn't make events, so there was another MSA that got started. So that's like the main MSA. So anyways, during the Christchurch attacks, the other MSA, the original one, they were asked to raise some money for Christchurch, and one of the groups that came together with, like, there was some Hindu society, and then was it Christian society as well, but then there was like a Jewish society, but we know that they're pro-Israel. So it's like, it doesn't make sense to come together to raise money for Christchurch if that same person is literally okay with Palestinians getting run down. So it's that consistency. So then what actually happened is that they actually that MSA, they decided to still go ahead with the event, and us, like the other MSA, the one that I'm affiliated with, we were just so confused, like, why would you do that? It makes no sense, right? So it's kind of alluding to what you were saying, Mohammed, about just the sincerity and the consistency.
I think you guys, I'm going to try address and respond to some, because quite a lot of things you said there. First and foremost, look, I think we have to be fair and consistent when it comes to, when we talk about unity or the prospect of uniting with Shias, if they tend to stay quiet or tend to intentionally ignore the crimes of Iran and Bashar and Hezbollah and all that kind of stuff. But the same breath, brothers, at the same breath, you will find Sunni Muslims who will defend what Saudi is doing in Yemen. You will find Sunni Muslims who will justify Saudi Arabia's boycott of Qatar. You will find Muslims who will defend Erdogan till their dying breath about what he's doing and not doing domestically and regarding Syria. You will find Sunni Muslims, right? I can't substantiate because it's not something that I can empirically state, but it's not unheard of to find Sunni Muslims who are also either apologists for oppressive regimes or they also remain silent. So we have to have a principle here. The principle has to be that if you are not consistent on matters of injustice and oppression of Muslims, right? Then whether you're Sunni or Shia, you're going to have to be called out, and unity with you is a problem, right? Because I've met both. I've met Shias who support Bashar or are either silent on Bashar intentionally. I've met Sunnis who blindly justify and defend what Saudi is doing. I've met Muslims who blindly defend every single thing that Erdogan does and doesn't do. So these people exist in all camps. The apologists and defenders and blind followers of regimes and rulers, they exist both among Sunnis and Shias. So the issue here has to be a matter of consistency, right? And not blindly following stuff. That's number one. Number two, with regards to stuff like Al-Quds March, which also happens in the UK, we had to kind of ask ourselves, the entire Palestine activism, I don't know what the case is in Australia, but the case in America and the UK at least, it has been nearly entirely dominated by the liberal left, right? Palestinian activism has been dominated by the left, right? So many times I've gone to universities and I've given talks at Islamic societies and I've asked the shabab, I've asked the youth, I've asked the students, what does free Palestine mean? What does free Palestine? Talk to me. What does free Palestine mean? And many of them just don't know. It's just an empty slogan. I'm not questioning or belittling the sentiment. The sentiment is beautiful and it's something that they inshallah will get reward for, right? But we have to be mindful that when we seek alliances and make alliances and attend gatherings and events, what is the objective of this gathering or this alliance, right? If it's just a case of, this is me personally speaking, I would ally myself with Muslims and non-Muslims, Jews, Christians, atheists, Shias, Zoroastrians, right? If there is a consistent call to raise awareness about the plight of the Muslims of Palestine whilst calling out the oppressive regime and policies of the Zionist entity of Israel, right? I don't see there being a problem with that. But once I start seeking alliances and Muslims start making alliances with groups and movements and ideologies which are calling for something which goes against Islam, and the solution from upon which they're calling it for also contradicts Islam, then we have a problem. Then we have a problem. I have a problem with attending an event or a march or a gathering where my so-called allies are calling for a two-state solution in Palestine. I don't recognize a fingernail's worth of Israel to be a legitimate state, and you want me to march with you on a two-state solution? No, thank you. However, I will march with you to raise general awareness of what's happening, so long as you're consistent upon accounting the Israelis as well as raising the plight of Palestinians. So I think seeking alliances, when Muslims seek alliances, whether it's the right or the left or north or south or whoever it may be, right? It has to be a matter of what are the red lines? What are our parameters? And that has to be exclusively dictated by Islam, right? That has to be exclusively defined by Islam, right? And its source texts, right? And the guidance of the righteous ulama. So you cannot just turn around and say, oh, because these guys are pro-Palestine, I'm going to march with them. Because those same guys who seem to be pro-Palestine are also pro-LGBT. They're also pro-sodomy. They're also pro this and pro that. They're also pro-abortion and pro a lot of other things which are overtly haram. Then what Muslims find themselves in, this is happening right now as we speak, is that when Muslims are seeking alliances, and it tends to be with the left leaning, the progressive left, that on issues of social justice, I will speak out for you against Islamophobia, so you can speak out for me on matters of LGBT, women's rights, abortions, etc. And I think it was Sheikh Shadi al-Masri, hafidhahullah, who actually said that we need to be, paraphrased, he says something along the lines of, we just need to be Muslims need to be mindful that these alliances and Islamophobia don't dictate our wala and bara and our ethical and moral and Islamic principles, right? If a liberal or if a non-Muslim believes that they should stand up for Muslims because they feel that we are a discriminated minority, then they should do that without a sincerity and without thinking that because we've spoken for them, they will now speak for us on issues of like LGBT and certain women's rights stuff, right? Like abortion and stuff like this. So all I'm saying is that when we seek alliances, right, irrelevant of what the political persuasion of those groups and movements are, Muslims just have to be mindful that we hold firm and we don't compromise on things which are black and white, right? So whether it's Shias or whether it's non-Muslims or whether it's even Muslims, brothers, even if it's Muslims, right, fellow Muslims, if you are seeking alliances with groups and movements who are essentially calling for something which is problematic or un-Islamic, then you wouldn't attend that gathering or support it, would you? So again, the issue isn't just exclusive to Shias, right? It's exclusive to non-Muslims and fellow Muslims, Sunni Muslims as well. That if they have problematic solutions and problematic ideas, that's, we have to question those alliances. But alliances based on shared interests, common goals, and without us having to compromise our values, our Islamic values, then I don't see a problem with that. And thirdly, just something that you guys also mentioned, I believe the global Shia community are in a far stronger position than the Sunni majority. The reason why that is that when you look to the majority of the Muslim world, with exception to Syria, where Shias make up like 10%, Lebanon, where they make up like, I think 30 or 40%, Iraq, where they make 60%, Bahrain, where they're like, I think 80%, and of course Iran. With exception to those countries, the Sunni world is in a state of political madness, right? Weakness, turmoil, occupation, civil war, economic crisis. But then the Shias, again, not all of them are supporters of Iran, but many are. They find themselves to have within Iran a strong emerging regional superpower who seems to have the cojones to, at least superficially, deliver what they say they would, right? So I find the Shia community to be far more unified, far more coordinated, and far more consistent because they find strength in Iran. Whereas when you look at the Sunnis, right, you should, I don't know about you guys should speak to like the many Shias when they speak about Ayatollah Khomeini or Ayatollah Sistani and these guys, it's lit. They speak of them as if like, like high level. Like I'm not comparing them at all, but I'm just saying they speak of them as if these guys are far-reaching spiritual leaders, whereas the Sunnis don't have that. So even when it comes to geopolitics and the understanding of global affairs pertaining to Islam and Muslims, the Shias come from a different position. They come from a position of strength. And I'll be honest with you, right? Whereas Sunnis, I keep saying Muslims, so I don't want listeners to think that I'm making like tacit takfir on the Shias. That's not the case, guys. Yeah, I'm just saying that with Sunnis, we're too busy internally bickering, man. The Abandis got beef with Barelvis, and Ash'aris got beef with the Atharis, and Salafi this beef, and Ikhwani beefs, and all these different kind of beefs. They're happening everywhere in different levels, in different environments. Heck, man, we even have a situation.
I want to ask you, Dilly. With we were talking about consistency, right? And I want you to touch on this quickly because we actually have a big topic we want to quickly delve into that as well. Because of running on time schedule, but the idea of the consistency. How about when Shias asked us about the Yemen situation? right? What's your take on that in general? Like, you just have your if you can say your opinion on that, and then we'll move on to, because you're talking about also like Belvi and all that. We want to talk a bit more about local politics as well, especially in US. So it'd be good to get your thoughts about the Yemen situation, because Shias really bring that up to undermine like, you know, Sunnis, if that makes sense.
Bro. If there's any Sunni out there that tries remotely defending and justifying what's happening in Yemen, may Allah guide you and assist you in finding the truth. I mean, what's happening in Yemen is not just a war against Saudi, its allies, and the Houthis. The people are being annihilated there. Sunnis are being killed there. Millions of people are experiencing famine, right? Tens of thousands have been killed. If you're a Sunni and you cannot find yourself to condemn Saudi Arabia and call out Saudi for its dhulm or what they're doing in Yemen, then you're a hypocrite and you are not consistent. And the Shia have every right to criticize you. How the hell can you be critical of Bashar and then remain silent on Yemen? Why? Because you think, what, have you bought the Saudi propaganda that it's a war against Shias in Yemen? Yes, the Houthis are Zaydis, and the Houthis may have their loyalties towards Iran. Khair. But the issue here is that Sunnis are being killed. And even if it was Shia that were being killed, innocent Shias that were being killed, or Zaydis that were being killed, that's still haram. That's still oppression. That's still wrong. Right? So my take on Yemen is that what's going on there is horrendous. It's a horrendous case of war and oppression that's taking place under the Saudi regime. And Muslims, especially Sunnis, have to be consistent. We have to be consistent. You cannot be critical of Bashar and then remain silent on Yemen because of some kind of sectarian notion that we're fighting this kind of neo-Safavid empire, which, by the way, I do believe there is some truth to Iran, you know, kind of is seeing itself as a neo-Safavid power within the region, right? I don't totally rule that out, that it's got its hands involved in Syria, in Lebanon, in Iraq, in Bahrain, and in Yemen. I'm not disputing that. But if you think that your sectarian loyalties to the Saudi regime somehow justifies what's happening in Yemen, wallahi, you're incorrect. You're wrong.
The reason why I just bring it up is because like a lot of Shias will say, oh yeah, the Sunnis aren't doing as much to help. That's why I kind of asked the question. But yeah, like, oppression in general, we should definitely be, you know, standing up to.
Bro,
yeah.
Habibi, I don't know about in Australia, bro, but Muslim charities, major Muslim charities in the UK, Sunni charities in the UK are constantly raising money for Yemen, and they're speaking out against Yemen. There is a particular groups and elements within the Sunni community who don't speak out against Yemen for three reasons. Number one, they tend to be very sectarian Salafis who blindly support Saudi Arabia, and they've bought that narrative and that propaganda that the war in Yemen essentially is a war against Shias and Shia supremacy. Number two, they are either receiving Saudi funding, the institutions of the charities. So even if they wanted to speak out against Saudi and what they're doing in Yemen, they can't because Saudi funds them and provides crucial funding and a lifeline to them. And thirdly, the reason why they don't criticize Yemen is because criticizing Yemen essentially can get you labeled as someone who's an apologist for Shias. Right? If you find yourself always constantly talking in defense against Saudis in Yemen, then you can be perceived as, you know, apologist for the Houthis. And all those three reasons are wrong. And we should be consistent in calling out what Saudi is doing in Yemen in the same way that what Bashar is doing in Saudi. And let's not forget, you know, Saudi has played very dirty games in Syria as well, in the way that it, you know, limited and periodically provided weapons and arms to certain factions, and then immediately put a plug on it when the colonial masters in Washington told them to stop funding certain groups. So we just need to be consistent. And if there's Sunnis out there that are staying quiet on the issue of Yemen because you think that is some kind of great battle against the Shias in the Arabian Peninsula, then you're wrong. You're wrong. I'm not saying that Iran doesn't have sectarian expansionist goals. It certainly does. but you cannot see the death and destruction of tens of thousands of Muslims, both Sunni and Shia, as well as the ongoing famine, as something which is, justifiable. It's disgusting. You have to be consistent, man.
Okay, Dilly, now I want to ask you about liberalism in particular, say how liberalism is applied when you apply it to Middle Eastern geopolitics. So basically from what I've seen and from my own analysis, liberalism is basically the whole liberal narrative, the liberal paradigm is but to prove that the minority is good, that the majority is oppressing the minority, and we should always help the minority. That's pretty much what all the liberal arguments are about. We should give even say here in the West, in say domestic issues, it's always we should give immigrants a chance, we should give aboriginals a chance, we should give people of color a chance. So that's what it's about. But when you apply it to the Middle East, it sort of becomes a bit problematic because take say a war say Syria. In that, one thing I've noticed about it is that say a lot of say the liberals, they tend to a lot of them tend to just support Assad and stuff, and the basic premise for that is because it fits into their liberal beliefs. So the thing is, Bashar is an Alawite, and the Alawites are a minority group in Syria, and the majority of the minority groups the Shias, the Druze, and the Christians and stuff, they support Assad. And since Bashar, even though he's committing most of the crimes, he's the minority group. And when you apply the liberal lens to it, and you notice that the majority of the rebels are Sunni, which are the majority, then when you just try to apply all this liberal logic to it, you just automatically go, the rebels are bad and Assad is less bad. But in reality, it's the other way around. When you look at the statistics, you see most of the deaths, most of the infrastructure damage, most of the hospital bombings are done by Assad. So I see that liberalism, liberal ideology, well, it generally tends to work well enough in the West. I don't see any major drawbacks about saying immigrants need to need to be helped in the West or whatever. There are no major drawbacks in the West. But when you try to apply to the Middle East, you get all these problems because and I think the main reason for that is that the power dynamics are different. Because say in Syria, it's a military dictatorship. All the power is centralized under the military dictator. The military dictator can do whatever they want. But take say somewhere say America or whatever. Say when Obama came into power, he couldn't fire all the white people, replace them with black people. He couldn't do that because power is split up between the different forms. But in say Syria, power is almost always in the hands of say the military dictator. That's why when you look at Syria structures and stuff, especially say the military, almost all the commanders are Alawite. When Bashar's father went into power, he just got rid of got rid of it used to be Sunni dominated in the leadership, but now he just changed it to Alawite, and he could do it because of the decentralization. So in a way, what I'm saying is that liberalism, when you try to apply it to say the Middle East, it promotes problematic solutions. Generally, liberalism is seen as the sympathetic ideology or whatever, and it generally leads to good outcomes. But when you try to apply it to the Middle East, it causes huge problems and stuff. So I'm thinking what do you think about liberalism as say a lens to view the geopolitics in the Middle East?
I feel liberalism is a broad spectrum, bro. So even when we use it indiscriminately in that way, you'll find hawkish liberals. You'll find liberals who are very pro-war. You'll find liberals who are, believe it or not, I'm assuming when you're talking about liberalism and liberals here, right? You're talking about. Correct me if I'm wrong, Mohammed. Are you talking about the liberal left?
Yeah. I'm basically talking about how they view the minority-majority relationship, about how the minority is always good, the majority is bad, stuff like that.
That's that understanding of the minority, the oppressed minority, and the oppressive majority. I think that's kind of it's exclusive to an element of liberal groups. Now, if they take that thinking of minority rights and the majority are oppressive, what tends to be the case in the West, and apply it in, let's say, something like Syria, I'll just simply say you're dumb. You're absolutely dumb, because just because Alawites make up 5% or 10%, they don't. The Sunni majority who you think are bad they don't have airplanes, they don't have fighter jets, and they don't have cluster bombs, and they don't have air missiles, and they don't have the Russians. So what are you talking about, right? Generally speaking, as a Muslim, you'll find that what a lot of secular liberals say, whether they are more from the progressive left element, and you'll even find liberals who are very hawkish and neocon in their thinking, wherever they come from, and whatever ideological spectrum they come from the entire school of liberalism, what they're calling for, and generally their understanding of not just domestic issues but international issues is a lot of tosh, right? And I say that, and I use this kind of language, is because that's the attitude we need to have. They do not represent the default, and that's an arrogance which liberals of different persuasions and stripes come with. They come with this assumption that they represent the moral right, and they don't. They simply don't, and they need to be reminded of that by Muslims in no unreserved terms. They need to be told, look, your liberal paradigm and lens in how you dictate morality, how you dictate what's right and wrong, and how you dictate who's the oppressed and who's the oppressor, etc. Quite frankly, that might have worked in the European Western model because it was something that was born out of your struggle. It was something that was born out of your struggle with the Vatican. And it worked. The nation state worked for you guys. Liberal democracy worked for you guys. But in the Muslim world, it didn't work because it's not from our tradition. There wasn't a battle between church and state throughout Islamic civilization. They had always worked in harmony, right? They were never seen as two separate things. So the reason why I'm going back to this, brothers, is because the reason why liberals perceive certain things and the way they understand the world is that they still have that problem of imposing the kind of European experience, right, in how liberalism was born. And they apply that. They apply that to the rest of the world, especially the Muslim world. So if there are liberal lefties out there that think that somehow the Alawites and Bashar are oppressed minorities, I don't know how to engage with you seriously. I think I'd first have to start by saying that even if the Sunni rebels were 60, 70, 80%, right? And also we need to make a distinction between the people and the rebels actually fighting. They don't have airplanes. They don't have the artillery and the weaponry to inflict the kind of industrial scale violence that Bashar has been doing. Number one. Number two, your paradigm and your lens of understanding the geopolitics and the very complex geopolitics of the Muslim majority world, you know, it's a load of tosh because you don't even acknowledge the fault of colonialism and how it has contributed directly to the state of the Muslim world today. So, yeah, I mean, if there's an element of liberals who believe that they can superimpose the kind of categorization of minorities, majorities, oppressed, and those who need justice, and try applying that, that's crazy. And I'd laugh at someone if they did that, because that means they've not understood the fact that when the French left Syria, they purposely gave a lot of the power share to Druze and Alawis to keep the Sunnis under control. And only particular select Sunni tribes were given a certain element of power. But it was the French specifically facilitated the Alawites and the Druze to come down from the mountains of Latakia and elsewhere and gave them the power, right? And essentially it was a minority ruling over a majority from an ethnic and sectarian point of view from the early days of colonialism, right? So all I'm saying is that whether it's a liberal take on it, or whether it's a socialist take on it, whether it's any other ism take on it, brothers, we just simply have to reject that. We just have to continuously remind ourselves that we have the Quran, we have the Sunnah, we have the Ijma of the Sahaba, we have the many, many works of our traditional and classical scholars, as well as those pious and God-fearing contemporary scholars, to help us guide us through these things and come out with solutions which are grounded in our Islamic values, ethics, and principles. And it's something that we have to constantly remind ourselves of, because we're living at a time where it's so easy, and we can make that mistake of, if not resorting entirely to ideologies and paradigms which are not from our tradition, we tend to start concocting things and mixing things, and finding ourselves in a situation where something's a bit Islamic and a bit left and a bit liberal and a bit socialist, and we can't have that. We can't have that problem.
I wanted to ask you, Dilly, just sort of like adding on what you're saying, and just like as a last question as well, just the idea, because you're talking about left and liberalism and stuff, even in the West.
Tan, sorry to interject, my dear brother. Can I just quickly make one more comment, because it's very important?
Yeah, go for it.
I mean, like today, I spoke at a Kashmir rally locally in my town, and I spoke to one of the brothers, and I said, look, I kind of don't want to give this talk because I know there's non-Muslims present, and I also know that most of the speakers here are going to talk about, appealing to the UN and writing to your MPs and asking the British government to lobby and pressure India and all that kind of stuff. And the brothers, they asked me, and there was a non-Muslim there present, said, okay, well, what's the solution? Because we know that the solution to occupation and oppression is to remove it. And the UN's not going to remove it. America, Britain, France, China, and Russia, the permanent security members of the council, will not remove oppression for us. They are not our saviors. Jihad fi sabilillah, upon the methodology of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to remove an oppression by an army, you need an army. To prevent oppression that's taking place with weapons, it needs to be removed by men with weapons. Right? It has always been the way. And I challenge anyone who's listening to this right now, find me an example in human history. Find me an example in human history where an oppressor has stopped oppressing his people or a people by waking up one day and thinking, you know what, I've had an epiphany, I'm going to stop oppressing these people. Never. Oppression has always been prevented and stopped by three means: external intervention, internal resistance, and punishment from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Those are the only three ways oppression and occupation has ever ended in human history. Never has someone woken up and think, yeah, you know what, I'm just going to stop oppressing these people, man. No, they've had to be removed or overthrown, or Allah has sent a punishment, right? This whole kind of, appealing to the UN and appealing to this body and that body, by all means, if you think that you need to exhaust everything that's within your means so you can say to Allah that you did everything that you can, at the same breath, you need to appreciate that there needs to be an element of reminding Muslims that this is not how we dealt with things traditionally. This is not how we dealt with things for 1300 years. That's not. Yeah, our history wasn't perfect. It wasn't a utopian society. We had many problems, but we never dealt with occupation and oppression like this. When lands were oppressed and occupied, they were liberated, and the oppressors were fought and removed and repelled. And why should that change in 2019? Because all of a sudden we've got international bodies and the UN Geneva Convention on International Human Rights. Ban all that, man. Ban all these new global systems of power and oppression. These things are here for a short-lived time, and inshallah these things will be removed, because essentially these things are obstacles, man. They're obstacles for Muslims to actually find their true solution.
Just to
having the UN there, having NATO there, having bodies like the African Union, the Organization of Islamic Conferences, the Arab League. These are all full-gazy institutions and mechanisms that are here to contain and retain power amongst select countries. Right? They're not there for Muslims to ever awaken themselves. Now, again, I'm not talking about a Salahuddin-esque dream coming alive. I'm just saying that we just need to be true to ourselves. That oppression, whether it's Palestine, Kashmir, Syria, Myanmar, wherever it is, if you think that UN and NATO intervention of any sort is going to prevent that, or any kind of lobbying and pressure is going to do that, you're quite frankly very naive, and you've not understood modern history.
I wanted to kind of ask you as well, because just to kind of like as a last question, and it is an important topic, it's just in the West, we have to deal with, for example, Ilhan Omar, in order to draw alliances. You know, she seems to side with LGBTQ groups that are obviously not Islamic principles. And we see also Hamza Yusuf at the moment, Sheikh Hamza. He's joined, you know, the committee that's affiliated.
Yeah, the Trump administration is advisor to human rights. Yeah.
Yeah. So you have, there are people that are like, let's just focus on Ilhan Omar quickly. Like, she's trying to, I guess, assist Muslims. Like, she's a Muslim. She's trying to go through the system and try to help Muslims. That's what I assume that she's trying to do. But then now she has to do things that are like un-Islamic in order to, you know, assist Muslims, which is a bit ironic. But anyways, but then you have like Sheikh Hamza, who's sort of gone down the route of really, not, I wouldn't say collaborating, but getting in touch with the rulers and perhaps trying to influence things in his own way.
Why wouldn't you say collaborating, bro? Why are you hesitant for saying it is what it is? He's collaborating.
Like, I wouldn't say directly in the sense that he approves of, you know, Trump's decisions that are
no,
anti-Islamic. But
when you say collaboration, I didn't mean also the fact that he's involved in oppressive policies, but he's certainly rubbing shoulders very warmly with not just the Trump administration, but with the tyrants of the UAE and elsewhere. So what? I mean, what do you want me to comment on Ilhan Omar?
So the whole idea is that we are seemingly doing un-Islamic things to achieve, you know, Islam, or trying to help the Muslims. Or
really?
It seems to on the surface level.
I mean, when did Ilhan Omar ever say that the reason why she joined the Congress, right, or the House of Representatives, whatever it is, when did she or Rashida Tlaib, or when did any of them ever say that what they're doing is for Islam? Is there any record of them saying that? Or is
definitely okay. Yeah, definitely. It wouldn't be like, I wouldn't say to help Islam. I would say to help Muslims in general.
Okay, but is there a record of that?
So that is trying to help Islam essentially, like to a degree, right?
No, but we can't just assume that, bro. I'm sorry, but I know the Yankees are a bit mad like that, but you can't just assume that. Oh yeah.
So you can't assume that they would at least want to help Muslims like in the West.
No. What I'm trying to say is that. What I'm trying to say is that. Look, bro. We've got 15 Muslim MPs in the UK. Yeah, not a single one of them voted against pro-LGBT curriculums being taught to children as young as 4 and 5. Not a single one of them voted against it. 9 supported it, 6 abstained. 10 voted in support of it, 5 abstained. How are they going to answer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the day of judgment that as legislators, as lawmakers, they essentially supported, 10 of them, something which Allah destroyed a people for in the Quran, he mentions? How are you going to justify to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, how are you going to explain to Allah that you supported something where children as young as 4 and 5 are going to be taught that it's okay to be homosexual and commit acts of sodomy? How are you going to explain that it's okay for a boy to identify as a girl to identify as a boy, and all this kind of matter? How are you going to justify that? My thing, and also with regards to Ilhan Omar, right? Remember, Islamophobia isn't our Quran, it isn't our Sunnah, it is not the Furqan. Islamophobia is not our Furqan. It's not. That's not. Social justice is not our Furqan. Yeah? The Quran and the Sunnah and the Islamic source text and our tradition explains and defines what oppression is. It defines what injustice is. It defines what justice is. So Ilhan Omar, who told her to go and join Pride and dance with gays and lesbians? She danced. She was dancing away, and what part of where? Like, I'm trying to understand where the blood fight did all that fit in. You understand?
I just think that from her perspective, it would have been that like she's trying to gain alliances, and since the LGBTQ, like, I'm not justifying, by the way, I'm just saying that from her perspective, it would have been like, you know, draw alliances because LGBTQ groups would would think that, you know, Muslims, you know, with Islamophobia, they want to at least help them be safe and protected, right? So I think that's the line of thinking from her perspective.
Yeah, I think
that's just what I'm saying. If you get what I mean.
Yeah, I think that line of thinking is a load of tosh. I think it's nonsense.
I think as well, but I'm just saying that why I bring up, I'll tell, like, why I bring up Sheikh Hamza as well is that he's taken stances that are like not the best stances, but we're sort of left to kind of figure out what do we do. That's what my question is essentially. As Muslims in the West to preserve Islam, what do you actually do then? What steps do we take in the political realm?
The engagement of Muslims in the democratic and political process, whether mainly in the Western world, has always been from two arguments. Argument number one: Muslims are a minority. We are kind of oppressed and discriminated. We need more Muslims in the system to improve ourselves and improve our prospects and chances as a community. Number two, we need more Muslims in the democratic and political process because it is good PR. To have a Muslim mayor is good PR. To have a Muslim congresswoman is
we've
good
always
PR.
heard that. Yep. I agree. Yeah,
but I'm saying to you that when, okay, fine, what have they done for Islam and Muslims? I want to know, isn't it? What is the maslaha? What is it? What have they done exactly? I want to know.
How about if we have like a fully practicing Muslim brother who we know his aqeed is in check, and then we send him off into the democratic system to
lose.
Yeah, is that what you're saying? Like, we should actually like figure out and get someone like trained to kind of encounter those situations. Like, what's the actual solution? Because Sheikh Hamza's obviously taken the route of, Sheikh bin Bayah, obviously with their ijtihad, they take their choice to...
Bro, there's two issues here, yeah? The issue of Sheikh Hamza Yusuf essentially falls under scholars who, through their understanding, and Allah knows best what other reasons, that they find themselves to be close to tyrants and oppressors and oppressive regimes. And the justification for it nearly tends to be that it's better to be an advisor and a kind of whisper of positive hope and aspiration than to be someone who condemns or does nothing. That's generally the argument of those scholars who tend to have very, very close relationships with tyrants and dictators and oppressors, right? That tends to be the argument. That argument has a very weak Islamic basis because we have at least two hadiths where Prophet ﷺ said, to paraphrase, that Allah, Prophet ﷺ, he cursed the oppressor and those who aids the oppressor, right? And there's also, we've seen from the Islamic tradition of the four Imams and other great classical scholars who stayed far, far away from rulers. And
it's flooded throughout history. Wasn't there a scholar who he kind of disowned his son because the son took up a position in government? Like, it's
Imam
so
Ahmed.
widespread in the tradition.
I'm not sure if it was Imam. I'm not sure if it was Imam Ahmed, but it was one of the.
I don't think it was just like one instance. It was like this is like littered throughout Islamic history. This isn't like just a one-off thing.
Yeah,
it's
of course.
like
it was normal. And remember,
full of evidences.
I remember this as well. When we talk about Islamic history, we're talking about, fine, I'm not saying that there weren't oppressive khulafa and oppressive sultans. There were. But these were guys who were collecting the zakah, distributing the zakah, protecting the frontiers of the Darul Islam, engaging jihad and spreading dawah, and essentially upholding the hudud, and were essentially fulfilling all the Shari'i duties that an Islamic ruler should be doing. And even then, there were scholars that said not to become close with rulers and kings and sultans.
100%. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, so now with regards to Hamza Yusuf, if he feels that Donald Trump and advising his human rights commission or on what's happening in the US and elsewhere, and he thinks that having a peace forum, which was hosted and funded by the UAE, who are currently involved in all kinds of madness in Libya, in Sudan, in Yemen, are responsible for a lot of carnage and destruction of the Muslim world. If he thinks that, hosting and leading those peace forums with warmongers is something which he can justify from his ijtihad and his understanding, then that's that's something between him and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
No, I think between me and you, we agree like we shouldn't be doing those actions. But my sort of question is like, then what do we do? Like for me, right? You're seeing those kind of situations and engaging with the system or whatever. I've realized that podcast is a way to get our information because we have free medium to discuss what we want and get the information out there. Right?
Okay, look. So in terms of what we do, I mean, I don't know, but I need to just nip this on the point as well because you mentioned Ilhan Omar. So the scholar issue is essentially, if that's what you've done, and from your understanding you've justified it, that's now with you and Allah, and how you're going to justify it on the Day of Judgment. That did you truly advise these oppressors? Did you even see them as oppressors? Did you even see them as tyrants? You can now deal with that between you and Allah on the Day of Judgment, but you're going to get called out for it. You're going to get called out for it because if the whole world can see what some of these rulers are doing and what some of these regimes and administrations are doing, but you seem to have found a justification to have a happy-yappy relationship with them, then of course you will be criticized and called out. But if that's your scholarly understanding, then you know what? That's between you and Allah. With regards to Ilhan Omar and generally Muslims participating in the democratic process, I find it difficult to understand what benefits to Islam and Muslims any Muslim politician in the West has brought, except for
Dilly.
Yes.
Yeah. I was just gonna say thing. Like the general idea about like these Muslims joining these Western governments is they reduce Islamophobia by representation or whatever. Like when they say Ilhan Omar wearing a hijab in like the U.S. Parliament, they become more accepting of hijabi wearing Muslim women in America. So what do you think of that?
Okay, then fine. So let's just take England. Let's take the UK for example. 15 Muslim MPs. A Muslim mayor. Has Islamophobia decreased? No, it's increased. Have Muslim women starting to get attacked less? No, they're getting attacked more. Is the Muslim mayor still called a Paki? Yes, he's still called a Paki by many white English folk. He's still seen as one, right? So you can talk about having a woman in hijab. What good is that woman in hijab if she's shacking out with gays and lesbians at a pride parade? Because that's the role. No, it's fine. But that's the role model you're setting, isn't it? Yes, we want our daughters to be like Ilhan Omar. Then essentially, you're also going to want your daughter to do what Ilhan Omar is doing to maintain and retain her power. Look, I'm a big believer that the vast majority, every politician is a career politician. He's a careerist, right? Muslim politicians are the worst careerists, right? Because not only do they suffer from an inferiority complex, not only do they suffer from the fact that they don't want to rock the boat too much because they're either a person of color or they're Muslim, but they also will do nearly anything and everything to maintain and retain their position or to go up that greasy pole of politics. I'm a believer that it's best to just have white non-Muslim politicians who don't suffer from inferiority complexes to speak out on issues without having to feel like they're going to get lynched, right? Whereas with Muslim MPs, why is it that most of them nearly always compromise on blatant Islamic values, like blatant things which are black and white, not even like grey areas, right? There's one thing Ilhan Omar, again, speaking out against Palestine and criticizing Israel, but that doesn't make her, for example, doing what she did regards to the Pride Parade somehow okay, because now when Muslims see that and they say, Amma, I really like Ilhan Omar. I want to be like Ilhan Omar. No, it's true. I want to be like Ilhan Omar. And Ilhan Omar doesn't just come in halves and quarters. You have to take the whole of her. You have to, because she is presented as a package in the same way that we have politicians. There's a famous, I think it's Nadia Khan or Nadia Begum. She was Bengali. She won the Great British Bake Off, right? And now all of a sudden now she is like this icon that, Muslim women should be. And then you've got Mayor Sadiq Khan, who stood in front of 300,000 people in London last month and said, I am proud, I am honored to be an ally of gays and lesbians. Right? And he was there, doing little Ilhan moves as well. Like, nah, man, I'm okay. I don't need those politicians to represent me. What I will turn around and say that social changes, meaningful changes in society has happened nearly always outside the status quo, outside the ballot box, right? Real change in societies have taken place outside the ballot box. Again, if you're not willing to accept that, then again, you have not really understood the history. You've not understood the women's emancipation movement in the UK. You've not understood the anti-apartheid movement in South Africa. You've not understood the Indian independence movement. You've not understood the Black civil rights movement. None of those four things, those four movements, right, or causes were landmark milestone examples, right? The women's emancipation in the UK, the suffragists and the suffragettes, the Black civil rights movement, the anti-apartheid in South Africa, and the Indian independence movement. If you look at those four things, all those things happen outside the ballot box. If you still think that your vote's going to make some kind of serious, meaningful change, then I'm sorry. I want to see facts and stats. Whenever I hear brothers like, Akhi, it's the maslaha, Akhi, you know what? The benefits outweigh the harms. Fine. I'm not saying that we don't outweigh the harms and benefits, but those harms and benefits, even from a Shari'i point, from a fiqhi point of view, it has to be based on something tangible, right? Show me how having Ilhan, or show me how having 15 Muslim MPs in the UK has combated Islamophobia and decreased it. If anything, it's getting worse. In fact, it is getting worse. Statistically, at least in the UK, Islamophobia is on the rise. It's on the rise big time. In fact, it's been on the rise for the last 3 years. That's with 15 Muslim MPs and a Muslim mayor who's prancing about in a pride parade. How's it going over in the States?
Would you say that the way we should go about social change then, because we can't engage with the system's not helping us? So you just alluded to, movements. Would you say like grassroots movement, like Tanzim, Islami kind of methodology? Like what's your kind of suggestion?
Look, man, at the end of the day, if there's Muslims out there that genuinely believe from whatever ijtihad, let's also remember that the vast majority of Muslims haven't done any Islamic research on the permissibility or the kind of strategic importance of engaging with the democratic process. Let's make that absolutely clear. The vast majority of the Muslim Ummah vote and participate in elections simply because that's all they know to be the norm. Yeah? But those who have done research, those who are part of movements and groups that believe that participating in the democratic process and having more Muslim politicians in certain influential positions, now somehow from the deen, this is something that is of great benefit. I would humbly say to you that we'd like to see some evidence. We'd like to see some actual tangible examples of where having Muslim MPs and Muslim legislators and Muslim lawmakers and Muslim mayors and Muslim judges, can you please show me where and how it has benefited Islam and Muslims? Because I would just respect Muslim politicians more if they just were honest and said, look guys, we're narcissists and we want to basically become politicians and we love ourselves and we love the sound of our own voice. That's cool, man. I'll actually respect that even more than you trying to always come down election time and try play the Muslim card to get the Muslim vote. I'm not saying that they all are narcissistic people who like their own sounds of their own voice, but they are careerists and they're just career politicians, right? And they will play the Muslim card or they'll play the Islamophobia card and they'll say that they play the Palestine card periodically at times to win votes. That's what they do in the UK. But even if, and I hope this is the case with many of them, those that speak out for Palestine and Islamophobia, I hope that they do believe in these things. But I need to remind them, and they need to be reminded, that Islamophobia and Palestine is not the Furqan. Allah did not say that Palestine and Islamophobia is the criteria upon which our activism and dawah is shaped around. Do you understand? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, in Surah Al-Imran, that indeed we have raised you as the best nation from amongst mankind because you enjoin in what's good and forbid evil and you believe in Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala also said in Surah Al-Fusilat, He said, who is better in speech than the one who invites to Allah, does good and says, indeed I am of the Muslims. Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said in the hadith that when you see a munkar, speak out against, change it with your hands. If not, speak out against it. And the lowest of iman is to hate it from within. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam didn't say the lowest of iman is to go and partake in those parades. You understand? So what I'm saying is we have a framework of Islamic activism and dawah, and I hate even separating the two. Dawah and activism is the same. It's the same thing. The prophets, all the prophets, they were sent by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on earth to convey the message of Tawheed, to worship Allah and associate and attribute no partners with Him, and an outcome and a manifestation of Tawheed is that you enjoin good and forbid evil, you battle injustice, you account oppression everywhere and anywhere you see it. You're not selective in these things, man. So what I'm saying is that there is already a tradition, there is always a frame, there's already an existing framework, right? Broadly speaking, about how Islamic activism and dawah should be done. It's not picking and choosing. It's not deciding that, you know what, because I'm going to speak about Islamophobia and white supremacy and Palestine, that I can now support abortion or support same-sex marriage or support, the pride parades. SubhanAllah, at least stay silent. At least hate it from within. Cool, like, you understand? So what I would say is, to those who encourage Muslims to participate in the democratic process in the hope that we'll get more Muslim politicians, convince those who don't engage that doing it actually has tangible results, other than just playing respectability politics and succumbing to and assimilating to and basically complying with the status quo, and just having to say, oh, for the sake of a diversity quota, oh, we've got a hijabi as a politician, look how advanced we are. Oh, we've got a Muslim brother called Mohammed or Sadiq Khan as a mayor, look how advanced we are as a community. For crying out loud, I was hoping, I'm sure black Americans have realized after 2 terms of Obama what having a black president means. In the same way that Muslims in the UK have found out with 15 Muslim MPs and a Muslim mayor of London what that has actually meant. The reality is that when it comes to election time in the UK, in the US, or anywhere else in the Western world where there are Muslim politicians, Germany, Holland, elsewhere, you will play the Muslim card, you will play the positive PR card, you'll play all the cards except for actually delivering on things when it actually matters, right? And with regards to those who are saying, okay, fine, He-Man, what do we do outside the ballot box? Outside the ballot box, you organize yourself, you coordinate yourselves, you put hands in your pocket and support with your wealth those institutions which will help preserve the Islamic identity of the future generations of Muslim youth. You go and work towards unity towards fellow Muslim groups and organizations, finding common goals and objectives to preserve our future youth and our generation. You go and write, you go and empower yourselves and equip yourself with the relevant skills to assist Islam and Muslims in the Muslim community and society by and large. The ballot box has never and will never be a single source of change for any cause, for any people.
Yeah, that's really good thoughts. Mohammed, did you have any thoughts you wanted to add? If I might wrap this puppy up soon.
Yeah, nothing brief.
Nothing
so
really?
I think we should.
I think you summed it up really well at the end. It's just, the Muslim community, we're in absolute shambles. And especially we see, all the situations that are happening in the Middle East or around the world to Muslims, especially like with Kashmir at the moment. It's just an absolute mess. And even domestically, politically, we're in mess. It's like everything. There's like literally no light at the end of the tunnel, it feels like. So that's why I asked you that question, because it's really hard.
Brothers and sisters, let me just say one more little thing. I'll try not to make another khutbah, yeah? Let me just say this, man.
Yeah, your final thoughts. Yeah. Your final thoughts.
Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He tests those with trials and tribulation because He loves us. And in fact, the word fitna comes from the word fithan actually comes from fitan, which basically, if I'm correct, and the Arabic-speaking listeners would probably understand this, it comes from the process of cleaning. Yeah, the word actually originates from a word that means a process of cleaning stone or metal. Allah is preparing the ummah of Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam for something very great. And let me tell you guys something else. We are living in a very unique time in Islamic history. Inshallah, Muslims in hundreds of years, if not 50, 60 years, or whatever years to come, they will look back at the 20th century and the early 21st century, and they will read about the Muslims and the struggles that we had. That we were those generations that for after 1300 years that we upheld and preserved our deen in the absence of a central authority, in the absence of having izzah and justice and control and influence over the world that we once enjoyed for over 1,000 years. What I will say to Muslims, especially the youth, do not be bystanders. This is a time to earn a lot of ajr. Do not be bystanders. Get involved. Because wallahi, on the day of judgment, and we know that Prophet ﷺ even said in a hadith that he has a special love for those that come after him. There's special love for those that come after him. In one hadith, some of the companions even got jealous, and Prophet ﷺ specifically said, is because they will come at a time where I am not here and the Quran is more or less being abandoned. I want to be of those people. We want to be of those people. All those hardships that you're looking at, all those difficulties that we're facing abroad, nationally, domestically. Trust me, these are things where Allah is testing the ummah. And it may get worse. It probably will get worse. But we need to understand that Allah and His Messenger have promised us victory and establishment on this earth. We know this. This is a promise, and Allah is the fulfiller of all promises. So we need to keep our heads up, our chin high, remain strong. Pessimism and disempowerment and negativity is from shaitan. Remain positive, remain empowered. We are the bearers of truth, and we all have a duty and a role to play. Don't be disheartened. No one should be disheartened, man.
Got me all hyped. I'm all hyped up right now.
Wallah, I'm being honest, man.
It was really...
Come on, man. We're living at a special time, man. There's lots of ajr for us to get. Go get it, man. Go get it. It's here for us to get.
Definitely, inshallah. And everyone can do their own thing. Like for us, that's why we started Boys in the Cave. We just found that there's no real outlet for Muslims to have free discussion and discourse. Like recently, not too long, I did an episode with Ustad Ismail Wahwa. He was locked up in jail. And when I was doing some pre-research for the episode, I'm just looking at all the articles. It's just, slander or just wrong information. And it's just pages and pages on Google. And you're just where's the Muslim outlets, bringing those kind of the authentic news to the table? I know you're doing it with 5 Pillars as well, and that's why you started as well. So I guess everyone has a role to do. There's so much to do. So inshallah, get your hands dirty. But you got me all hyped, alhamdulillah. Let's do it for the Ummah. Do you have any final thoughts? I'll probably wrap it up. But do you have any thoughts, Mohammed? Any last final thoughts? Not?
Nothing. Yeah, nothing really. Just I guess we all do have a role, even if we don't know it. And I guess we should always make dua. I think sometimes an idea I have is that Muslims, they should make dua to find out what they need to know but which they don't know, because I think there are a lot of things which we need to know but which we don't know.
SubhanAllah. Those very profound thoughts. But I think it was an amazing episode. We touched on a lot of things, alhamdulillah, a lot of wide variety topics. So jazakallah khair.
Always a pleasure, really always a pleasure and an honor to be on the Boys in the Cave. May Allah bless you guys. May Allah accept it from you guys. You're doing some fantastic work. Now we even briefly spoke during Ramadan when you were fundraising. It's hard out here, man. It's hard. Sometimes, we do the work. Sometimes we do it for little to no money, with no actual rewards and tangible fruits. Tangible rewards, but we just keep at it, man. And I just want to say you guys are doing a great job. And genuinely, man, I find BITC, it's mad, isn't it? Because if I put a H at the end, it'd be a swear word. But okay. But BITC, Boys in the Cave are doing big work, man. Big work, man. Big work. May Allah accept it from you guys, man.
I mean, likewise, I feel this is the Mad Mamluks Boys in Cave, 5 Pillars. I'm very happy to call you a very good friend. We talk offline a bit as well. So, because we're all on that same journey, just trying to help the Ummah in every way, shape we can. So it's, it feels like I'm working with you side by side, even though I'm not technically, but, inshallah, we'll keep doing what we're doing. So I'll love to have you on in future episodes as well, and we can have more discussion, because there's so much to unpack, so many issues to discuss. So jazakallah khair. So for our listeners, thank you for giving us your attention. If you have any comments or questions, feel free to email us at info@boysinthecave.com. You can find us on Facebook or Instagram. Check us out on YouTube. And, Dilly mentioned donations. You can hop onto Patreon and, donate how much you can. $1 a month, $5, $10, be whatever it is. But inshallah, you can help us out on patreon.com/boysinthecave. So from our very special guests, Dilly, Mohammed and myself, we wish you all the best. This is Tanzim signing off. Assalamu alaikum.